It's not often I get to talk to Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, in the library of my New York apartment. So I can't tell you how appreciative I am, Madam Speaker, that you made the time to come and talk to me about your new book.
My pleasure, and a book in your library.
I know, and it's called The Art of Power, My Story as America's First Woman Speaker of the House. You have had such a fascinating life, as you say, going from housewife to House member to House Speaker. But that's not really the story you chose to tell in this book, is it?
Well, that is another book. This book is about a decision I made years ago that I wanted to write about at least 4 decisions or rooms where it happened, whether domestically, the Affordable Care Act, and the TARP, the Wall Street meltdown, and globally, the war in Iraq, which I opposed, and our relationship with China. Just telling the story as I saw it. But that was a while ago. I couldn't write it until I was no longer Speaker because I didn't have the time. So when I did, then it was like, well, you have to say something about Trump, and you have to say something about January 6th, and you have to say something about what happened to your husband. So it has some more current things there. But the point was to write about what happened in those 4 important decisions for our country. There's another book, this is not a memoir, there's another book that'll talk about some things that have happened around now, and again with more personalities in it. This is more
Policy.
Policy, yeah.
And it is a lot about making these critical decisions, the role of leadership, the use of power. And I know that you write that your friend, Louisiana Congresswoman Lindy Boggs, told you early on in your political career, know thy power and use it. How hard was it as a woman, because you're such a pioneer, to actually embrace that power and use it? Was that something you had to really learn how to do?
No, it's something I had to decide to do. I keep saying, when I became Speaker, I knew I had to do the job in a very particular way in terms of the use of power, the diversity that I wanted to bring to it, not just me, but so many other people, the understanding I wanted people to have about power being from consensus, from listening, from respect, not from above, but from the people that would have to make the votes for it. And so you build them as much consensus as possible, not recognizing that you're not always going to have unanimity.
How hard was that, though, for you as a woman, as a young woman, as someone who was in the minority, who wasn't being taken as seriously, perhaps, as you think you should have been, and as you should have been?
Yeah, well, that's that other people's problem. That's not my problem. You don't take me seriously. That's to your peril, because we're here to get a job done. When I first went to Congress, there were 23 women out of 435 members. Is that appalling? And so I immediately knew that we had to make a change in that, and made a decision to elect more women, more Democratic women, of course, but more women to Congress. We now have 94. We went from 12 to 94, but I still want more. But the Republicans have gone from 11 to 30-something, which is good, but they still need more as well. But so it wasn't, when I say there were 23, it was a novelty. It was a novelty. It was a rarity too. And so men didn't feel so threatened by that. Then as our numbers grew and grew, they wondered.
What's going on here?
Yeah, what's going on here? And if we ever wore the same color one day in solidarity for whatever diagnosis there was or whatever was going on, they'd be like, what are they up to now? Or if we either gathered in their well just to share a thought, what are they up to now? And then when I ran for leadership, it was, poor babies, who said she could run?
You write about that, and it was so frustrating. You say that a lot of the men really tried to diminish you and your skills and insist on a pecking order and a timeline, like, wait your turn, little lady. But you had a great response to them, didn't you?
Well, they said, some of our people have been waiting a long time for a position to open up. And I said, well, wait a minute, we've been waiting over 200 years, so don't talk to us about a timeline. But I said to them, don't vote for me because I'm a woman, but don't vote against me because I'm a woman. I wasn't putting myself out there, we need a woman in leadership. I wanted to win, I wanted to prevail for the Democrats. I thought that was really important. I take great pride in being a Democrat, and we were losing each election, 94, 96, 98. So in 2000, I asserted myself politically, and in California that night we went from 26 Democrats and 26 Republicans to 31 Democrats to 31 Democrats, 21 Republicans, and then they started to take notice. But I didn't get elected Speaker because of anything other than the fact that I won the majority, and that's how you get a Speaker. You win the majority.
I asked a friend of mine what he would like to ask you, Speaker Pelosi, and he said, please ask her why she never ran for president.
Oh.
And so Ralph Esposito, my friend, this question is for you. Why haven't you, or why didn't you?
Well, first of all, I came to Congress, I ran the first time when I was 46 years old, and that's down the path politically. I'm a legislator. I loved legislating, and being Speaker of the House is the second most important position. I mean, the Vice President is first in line to become president, but in terms of power, the awesome power of the speakership is, in my view, on a par. Not on a par with the president, he has other responsibilities, but for what I cared about, making a difference in people's lives through legislation. Legislating and the use of power to do so is about, again, respect, listening, learning from members, building consensus. It's hard because you're talking about policy, and with it you have to have a vision as to what your goal is. You have to have a knowledge of the issues and judgment about how to prioritize. You have to have strategy as to how you're going to bring people together. And that's a big undertaking, and so you don't have time to think about any other office but the one you're in.
For the first time in this book, you talk extensively about the brutal attack on your husband, Paul. It's been almost 2 years. I can only imagine how horrifying that was.
It was horrifying, and it continues to be. We're hoping by the time it is 2 years, the end of October, that Pop, we call him Pop, will be more fully recovered. He's on his way. He's about 80%. No, it was beyond shocking that someone would come into our home and seek me out, not find me, but assault my husband in that way, and really a centimeter, as the doctor said on trial, from his being a fatal attack, attacking his brain. But it is, it's not, to enlarge the issue, it's not just about us, it's about the exposure that anyone in the political arena has if you speak out and the rest, and we have to turn that down in terms of what that man was saying when he was going through our house and the rest, and what was said. It's very similar to what was said on January 6th, what was going through the House of Representatives and the United States Senate.
I want to talk to you about the political climate in a moment, but I saw your husband at the Kennedy Center Honors shortly, not too long after this had happened, and he had a bandage on his head, and I believe he was wearing a fedora, and he was in good spirits.
Yeah, that was an unusual thing. In other words, he does still go to some things, but he has to prioritize and not stay too long. But he loves the Kennedy Center Honors. He was able to go that year, but not the next year.
So how is he doing? You said 80%. What are some of the challenges he still faces?
Anyone who has any kind of a
traumatic brain injury, right?
And it's concussion and all that kind of thing. It's about having dizzy spells, which means you can fall and have other injuries. It's about being, again, fainting with the dizzy spells, things like that. If we go to an event now, even in a friend's home, pretty soon, after a few minutes, he'll be sitting down. He cannot stand up a long time, And that's all doable. No, people are suffering so many worse things.
But still, it's so unnecessary and so infuriating that this happened to him.
Well, in our own home, which is to make our home a crime scene, to come through, break in, find his way into our bedroom. Imagine, where's Nancy, where is Nancy, and that. And what was really sad about it, Katie, was that people on the other side of the aisle were making a joke of it. And you wonder, what is it about these people that they think it's funny that someone is assaulted in that way? And not only someone, but our system is assaulted. Other families are fearing, why should I go into this if this is could be one of the consequences? They made jokes of it, people laughed, they got all this feedback on the social media, and that's just not right for our country.
How do you explain that? It was so infuriating, after President Trump's failed assassination attempt, you condemned political violence in no uncertain terms.
And thank God he survived. Oh my God.
And after this happened to your husband, people were making jokes. They were mischaracterizing the situation.
They were lying.
Yes, lying about the situation, including the president's own son and high-ranking people.
Governors,
I mean, it's just gross, isn't it?
It's gross. But you have to remember, follows the context of the former president, current candidate for president, again, I don't like using his name, saying to the mobs in his events, if you beat up the press, don't worry about it, I'll pay for your lawyers. I'll pay your legal fees. Well, what is that? If you beat up the press, I will pay your legal fees? We're talking about freedom of the press, which is the guardian of our democracy, of our freedom, of all of the First Amendment rights. Freedom of the press is about transparency and the rest. So I consider it the most important of them. And if you beat them up, I will pay your legal fees. And then we saw what happened in Charlottesville with all the violence that happened there. Oh, there are good people on both sides of that, the then president said.
And of course, culminating on January 6th.
On January 6th, an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. It was horrible, and now he tries to distance himself from it. But he refused to send the National Guard. His Secretary of Defense, his Secretary of the Army, that's the chain of command for that. They refused to send it, and now they're lying about it too. But it's really a sad situation, and it's no use even talking about it. All we have to do is win the election and hope that the Republicans will take back their party. It's really turned into a cult to a thug, in my view. And this is more of a situation where the grand old party did great things for our country, provided great leaders in our country. And whether we disagreed on some policy matters, we were all patriots and respected each other in that way. That's not the case with this guy. So if they would take back their party, it's up to them to decide what that party is, of course, but it shouldn't be what we're seeing now.
What do you make of people who have now minimized the threat of bodily harm and the damage that was done on January 6th, Madam Speaker? I mean, what do you make of that? And the fact that former President Trump says he will pardon the insurrectionists.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what happened that day was horrible. It was an assault, of course, on the Capitol, the beautiful Capitol, which is an emblem of a temple of democracy to the world, under the dome that Lincoln built during the Civil War. During the Civil War, people said, don't continue the dome, save the steel and the manpower for the Civil War, and he said, no, I have to show that we are resilient, and they completed the dome and went forward with the dome. And these people came in with Confederate flags under the dome, even a Nazi flag, under Lincoln's dome. So that was horrible optically to the world. Then it was an assault on our Constitution, which was more significant because this is when the day we are supposed to certify the election, a peaceful transfer of power of the results of the Electoral College for the president. Appalling. But that's why they came that day, to prevent that from happening. This just wasn't any day of the week. It was the day that we were required to do that, and we did. And then the third was, of course, an assault on Congress. An assault on Congress, which had the responsibility to do that, but physically the Senate chamber, the House chamber, seeking the President of the Senate, who's the Vice President of the United States, with a gallows, a horrible situation, seeking out the Speaker of the House on our side, going to bullet in the head and all of that. So Congress, the Capitol, the Constitution, all assaulted that day, intentionally that day, because of the day it meant. Thank God the Vice President honored his responsibilities as Vice President according to the Constitution. But what was sad about it is, following all the damage and defecation and danger of all of it, we go back in. They said, "Oh, we'll just have to do it in undisclosed location." I said, "No, we're going to the Capitol. We're going to the floor." And Chuck and Mitch, we all agreed that would be the course, the three of us. And so we went back. But when we went back, overwhelmingly, the Republicans, including their leadership, voted not to accept the results of the Electoral College. It was so saddening to see them walk away from that. So when you ask, what do you think of these people? What do you think of Mitch McConnell, if you read his speech that day, or even up until the 13th of February when we were impeaching the president for this, and McCarthy and the things they said that day, and then what they ended up doing, just walking away from their remarks and now supporting him for president.
Why do you think they had a change of heart?
I don't pay too much value of about Kevin, but in terms of Mitch, he's a serious person in the Congress of the United States. I feel very sorry for him. I don't know how he lives with his decision, but that's his decision.
Are you concerned that after this upcoming election, that if President Trump loses, he'll refuse to accept the results?
Oh, sure. I mean, he's irresponsible. I don't know what he will do, but...
Is there a plan if that happens?
You mean plan on our side?
Yeah.
Well, everybody knows what he's capable of. Who would have thought the lack of patriotism, the lack of interest in a peaceful transfer of power, abandonment of fact and truth. I mean, this was a very irresponsible thing for him to do, and to encourage people to follow him, his toadies, his enablers in the Congress and in other parts of the country. When we brought the case for our accepting the Electoral College results, it was based on, most of these states had Republican leadership in the positions of authority to approve these plans. It was mostly Republican that we were quoting in terms of the integrity of the vote. So it's now everybody knows what to expect of him, and that's a different story. But an insurrection incited by the President of the United States was not something anybody could expect.
I know that this is a plea for decency, a return to decency in some ways. Do you think that both sides are contributing to the current lack of civility, to put it mildly? And why do you think it's gotten so bad? I've covered politics a long time. You've been in politics probably for as long as I've covered them. And I think people have said it's just never been like this. What do you think the root causes are?
Well, first of all, let me disagree with that stipulation that you put forth, that both sides are responsible.
No, I'm asking if you think.
Yeah. No,
I'm not saying they are. I'm asking if you believe that's the case.
No, I don't think so at all. I don't see any of our people saying to their supporters, beat up the press and we will pay your legal fees. I don't think, I see our people saying in Charlottesville, there are good people on both sides. That equivalence that some have put forth is so wrong. And also when they say there's dysfunction, there's not dysfunction, it's obstruction. Obstruction on the part of the Republicans who do not believe in science, do not believe in governance. And if you don't believe, if science tells you we have to take care of children because this is how their brains develop, and you don't believe in any initiatives to address that because you don't believe in governance, then we have a disagreement. Same thing with the planet, and the list goes on. So we have a major policy disagreement, and that's legitimate. Since the beginning of our country, we've had those disagreements. But that doesn't mean that if you're anti-governance, that you're going to take it down. You take it, you want to minimize it, you want to change the balance between federal and state and all that, that's legitimate debate. But not to take it down as they tried to do on January 6th. So I do not in any way see, now I have been a victim of everybody, well, the far left, the far right, everybody, as far as I'm concerned. But on the left, it's mostly policy. Largely, it's policy disagreement. They don't want, I don't go far enough here, I don't go far enough there, yeah, okay. But on the other side, I've been a victim of the Republicans for 20 years. I was leader or speaker. They had me like a devil in flames, an animal with horns, cloven feet, all the rest of that, and really contributed to the atmosphere in which my husband was attacked.
Where do you think that comes from, that rage against you specifically? Do you think it's misogyny? What do you think is behind that?
I think it's a bankruptcy of ideas on their part. They don't have anything to suggest, because what are they for? They're for tax breaks for the rich. The only thing they did when he was president and they had the majority was a tax bill that gave 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. Top 1%, adding $2 trillion, with a T, not a B or an M, $2 trillion to the national debt. And then saying, well, we can't do this for the children because it will add to the national debt. So they don't have an agenda that has popular appeal if people understand it. So what do they have to do? The politics of personal destruction or attack. And that's what they did. And of course, I'm very proud to represent San Francisco. In fact, when I gave up my leadership roles, I said, don't worry about me. Nothing makes me prouder than to step onto the floor to say I speak for the people of San Francisco. They like to say, oh, San Francisco. Yeah, San Francisco values. The song of St. Francis, make me a channel of thy peace. Where there's darkness, may we bring light. Hatred, love, despair, hope, the list goes on. So, but I think it's their anti-governance attitude, their anti-science attitude, and they don't want, and some rich people don't want to pay taxes. So they fund this bankruptcy of this lack of ideas with personal attacks.
Let me ask you about that, because the Democrats have been losing white working class voters for some time, and they seem to be gravitating toward Donald Trump. Why do you think that's happened? And why do you think that they feel, many Trump supporters feel, that he cares more about them than the Democrats do?
Well, because he's a good snake oil salesman. That's why. You have to give him credit. He gets out there and sells a bill of goods, but what does he do? Give a tax break to the top 1%. He doesn't care about those people, but he gives them the impression they do. But I'm respectful of the American people. I do think there are some people who have concerns about, well, some of them are just want to discriminate, and we'll never get them, and our appeal is not to them. There's some cultural issues, guns, God, being a woman's right to choose, and gays, which have been for a while pulling some people into a place where they felt they should vote because of cultural issues, and that's important. Some of that is diminishing in terms of LGBTQ, as they see more family members, etc. But nonetheless, the gun issue and that. But I am very respectful of the fact that there are some people in the country, some of them have voted that way, that are concerned about the future. They're uncertain about globalization. They're concerned about innovation. They're concerned about immigration. They are seeing everything that diminishes their prospects. Immigration, the least, but that's not how they see it. Immigration, innovation, and globalization, they have to see a larger picture about how they do benefit from that. But if they see a factory leaving down the road, they have a legitimate concern. I think what Joe Biden has done, and masterfully, I give him so much credit for it, is all of the bills that we passed, whether we started with the rescue package, the first bill, the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, the PACT Act for our veterans, and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of those bills have a justice element in them, that more people will participate. There'll be funding for education, for STEM, so people can be involved. That people understand that this infrastructure bill and some of the others have real jobs you don't even need to go to college for. They're about making a good living. And if you decide to go to college after, that's up to you and good for you, but you don't have to be able to sustain a lovely lifestyle and a retirement. And I don't think those bills have been put out enough, and that's part of what my, shall we say, interest is in this campaign, is to make sure people understand what is in it for them at their kitchen table. Joe Biden, 15 million jobs. The other guy, the worst job record since Herbert Hoover. Okay? And these people are voting for him. 15 million jobs. Wages rising, unemployment down. The list goes on of things that have affected people at that table that they may not be fully aware of.
Something seems to be...
And shame on us not to make it
I was
them aware of it. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say something is clearly being lost in translation.
Well, it is, but again, they inoculate. They go out there with guns and blah, 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 blah. And so it's harder to get the message across. But we have to do it. And that's what campaigns are about, and that's what we will do. And in doing so, to make sure everybody understands the legacy of Joe Biden as president, one of the most consequential presidents in our country's history when it comes to all of the issues, whether it's jobs or pensions, whether it's education or environmental protection for children to have clean air, clean water to drink, and safer neighborhoods with gun violence legislation. But all of it, we have to do more. Elections are not about what you have done. It's about the future. So when we go out there, we have to make sure that people see the contrast for the future, for their kitchen table, not the boardroom table, not the cabinet table, their kitchen table needs, whether it's about how democracy affects them. Democracy is about freedom, freedom of a woman to choose, families to choose the size, timing, or if they have a family. About LGBTQ, choosing who you love rather than somebody in Washington, D.C. doing that for you or in your state capital. Issues that relate to the job opportunities. 16 million jobs versus worst record since Herbert Hoover. And they're voting for him? Well, we have to make sure that people understand. Now, there's inflation and there's cost of living, and that's global. It's been contained the most in the U.S., but people have to know.
And they blame that on President Biden.
Well, they blame it on whoever's in power at the time. But many of these things go back in terms of chain of command. But you know what? That's the way it is. You get the credit, you get the blame if you have the office. And it's no use. We don't agonize, we organize to win the election and not say, oh, if only they thought this. No. I respect the goodness of the American people and the fairness of the American people in a calm, respectful way. And I think Kamala Harris will do that beautifully.
And we'll talk about that in a moment, but do you worry on cultural issues? Mm-hmm. Some people see the Democratic Party as simply too far left. Are there some of these cultural issues, Madam Speaker, that are turning centrists off to the Democratic Party?
Well, I named three. Guns. we will always fight until the job is done to make sure we have background checks and the things that are reasonable to protect people. That will always have that fight until the job is done. I make no excuse about that. I see, what's his name, the guy running for president, saying, Kamala's for everybody registering guns. She's not. They lie. But people hear that and, oh my gosh, she's for registering. She's not. Nobody's ever talked about it. We talked about background checks as being saving more lives than almost anything you can name. We have our interest in banning assault weapon bans, as we have done before, and it saved lives. It's not about registering guns. Secondly, in terms of LGBTQ, I mean, when I came to Congress 37 years ago, that was one of my main issues, to fight against HIV/AIDS. This was at a time when people were saying to parents who were bearing their children from AIDS, you know, your child is going to hell. They go to the funeral home and say, you know, your child is going to hell. So we've come a long way from that attitude. There's still some people who have it, but I think we've come a long way from that. The trans issue is, we've had moms come to our meetings to say, I'm a Trumpite all the way, I have always been, but my child needed particular attention and care, and they were going to arrest me and the doctor who would provide it. They're going to stop me from taking care of my child. I can't subscribe to that. So understand what some of this is about. And no, I don't think that many people are taking a walk from the Democratic Party because of that. I think lots of it comes down to what is their understanding of the economic issues, what it means to them at their kitchen table. Because I'll tell you something, if they were ever, what they intend to do in their next, it's really important to note this. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's really important to note this. What they intend to do is to pass again the high end, $2 trillion in the national debt, to give tax breaks to the rich people who don't want to pay taxes, to provide for the national defense, to provide for the general welfare, to promote the good of our country. But also, and they're already trying to implement this in the House now with the majority, is they want to do away with the Department of Education. They'd rather have education be more quotas, more vouchers and things for religious education and the rest. And that means that children in economically disadvantaged areas, Title I of our, want to greatly diminish Head Start for children who need a running start to go to school. So in terms of education, which is fundamental to our democracy, an informed electorate, I always like to point this out because I'm an appropriator in my essence in the Congress, appropriations and intelligence. Nothing brings more money to the economy. No, I'll say it again. Nothing brings more money to the national treasury than investments in education. Early childhood, K through 12, higher ed, post-grad, lifetime learning for our workers. Nothing brings more money to the treasury. Helps people reach their fulfillment, helps our country be more competitive and successful. And again, the greatness of our country. People rise up with education, and they want to do away with the Department of Education. You know why? Because they teach critical thinking in those schools. Those public schools, they teach critical thinking. How can we have that in a country? So, we have a difference of opinion. So many other things they would do in there that relate to, you can't even imagine what they would even do to the Department of Defense to say we shouldn't be out there helping defend democracy in other places. I would refer you to a wonderful article in the San Francisco Chronicle today about how bad their 2025 is. It's not a San Francisco
Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation.
The Heritage Foundation thing. It's not a San Francisco article, it's a syndicated article, but it just says it does everything wrong. And it points out these are by the same people who refused to send the National Guard on January 6th.
He has Trump has distanced himself from that whole.
Well, he's lying because he was central to it. He wouldn't send the guard. He resisted, and they know it. They know it. And even Mitch McConnell was on the phone with us in the middle of the afternoon. We were saying, you must send. He said, you better get them over right away. You have to see his actual language. And now he's... But I'll tell you, I could tell you more about that, but not really on this program.
Maybe when you write your memoir, you can tell us more.
That'll be the next book.
I want to ask you about the current political situation and the time we have left. You talk about the Trump family and basically saying that there should have been an intervention by the family. You write, if former President Trump's family and staff truly understood his disregard both for the fundamentals of the law and for basic rules, and if they had reckoned with his personal instability over not winning the election, they should have staged an intervention.
Yes.
But with all due respect, Speaker Pelosi, when I read that, I wondered, couldn't the same thing be said about President Biden? Should people have earlier determined that perhaps he didn't have the physical stamina to endure a re-election campaign and put the Democratic Party in a better position for this election?
Well, with all due respect, again, you're making an equivalence here that doesn't exist. Whether you think there's stamina to run again and serve for 4 years is quite different, whether you're undermining our democracy in the office that you hold. And that's what Donald Trump was doing. And this was about his harm to the country and his instability that he was bringing to it, and the anti-patriotic attitude he had. It wasn't about whether he was healthy enough to do this or that by physical health. It was what was happening in his distortion of the facts and how he was misrepresenting to the public. Two completely different situations. And when it came, if it's just a question of does somebody have the stamina to save for 4 years, we have addressed that. They haven't.
Let's talk about how it was addressed, though. Should there have been more transparency, even if these two things are not equivalent?
Well, they're not equivalent, so why they're not equivalent.
But that doesn't answer the question of whether there should have been more transparency. If President Biden was too protected and kept from the public for too long, in that it put the Democratic Party at a disadvantage, given the election is less than 100 days away.
Well, he's not the candidate.
No, but
he's
I
not
mean,
the candidate.
should it have been dealt with earlier?
Up until then, he had an enormously successful NATO summit, the 75th anniversary of NATO in Washington, D.C. They produced great policy statements and the rest, very unified, a newly expanded NATO under his leadership, strengthened and expanded with 2 new countries, Finland and Sweden, coming into the country, unified in terms of the fight in Ukraine, as was stated by them. He has now, just a matter of days ago, effected a virtuoso performance in bringing home the prisoners. It was a very complicated deal involving many countries willing to surrender prisoners in order for us to get our prisoners out and other prisoners out. It was masterful. So he has been functioning A+. Whether he would do that for another 4 years is a different story. But in the presence, we haven't lost anything with his service. Whereas with that other guy, we were getting our democracy shrunken and diminished and our freedoms diminished. And you're like, well, why is this happening? How could he be standing up there and saying, if you beat up the press, I'll pay your bills? Is that a normal thing to say? Does that seem normal? No, I don't think it does. But I don't think it's the equivalent of somebody saying somebody didn't do well in a debate. And whatever the family decisions were, now I work with him quite a bit. I never saw that because I work with him usually earlier in the day when he was more in charge. Then I saw that night. I saw it that night, was the first time I saw it. So I don't subscribe to any of these, the Democrats are this or that, or in terms of violence, the Democrats are this or that in terms of holding people accountable. He's not running. The other guy is running.
Let's talk about Kamala Harris's candidacy. It seems that it's off to a very good start. What are you most worried about between now and Election Day?
Well, as I say, we don't agonize, we organize. And I want to just make sure that we have our 3 M's. Our mobilization at the grassroots level, which is owning the ground. To make sure whatever persuasion we have accomplished, we're getting out the vote. Own the ground, that's mobilization. Messaging, the boldest, most progressive message, non-menacing though, not to be tattooed with some minority view that people have, that they like to see the party go in. That's not our consensus, but it's our consensus. So mobilization fueled by a message of hope and for the future. And then the money to get that done. Obviously, she's raising money at the grassroots level, 1 million people, and many of them new, small donors adding to the coffers to mobilize with a message that is, again, unifying for our country. So if we have that in place, I think that we will do well. But none of it matters as much as the candidate. What is the vision of the candidate for our country? What are the values that that person brings to the table? What is the empathy that she has in her heart for the American people? What is the commitment to the values of our founders for our democracy? The gratitude to our men and women in uniform for fighting for our freedom and the aspirations of our children as we go forward. I feel very confident that Kamala will be able to convey that. You see, they don't want to talk about kitchen table issues because they're about the boardroom table, not the kitchen table. So they're questioning her race and this or that, which just shows you the bankruptcy of their ideas.
What do you think she should be looking for in terms of a vice presidential candidate?
That's going to be up to her. I think the most important
What do you think? Yeah, what is important?
I think the most important thing is who can serve as vice president and be a source of judgment, knowledge, again, vision, values for her, for our country, when she's president of the United States. It'd be important for her to have somebody who could help win the election, because we must win the election. Everything is at stake. Our democracy is at stake. Everything is at stake with that guy, the other one. But the most important thing is that's over and above the most important thing, who can be a great vice president for our country. And again, somebody that could serve down the road or if necessary.
Is it important that person be from a swing state, for example?
That's almost incidental to the what is the purpose of the vice president. My view is that all 6 of the candidates that we've heard about, I don't know if there are others, are great. I love them all. Any one of them would be a great vice president. She has a rich field of talent to choose from. And so some may be helpful one place and more helpful another, even if they're not a swing state. They may be helpful in swing states because of what they bring to the table. But I've worked with all of them. I have great respect for all of them. Any one of them would be a great vice president. And that's really what I think she had. My experience with presidents has been that's the value, that they want to know who they can live with very effectively for America.
Some of it is about chemistry too, don't you think?
Well, that's what I mean. Who does she have the comfort level to trust the judgment, speak shorthand to each other so that you have an understanding about how you go forward. I think chemistry is important, but again, vision, values, empathy, knowledge, and judgment are part of it, and that's part of the chemistry, I think. You give it that name. That's good. I think she knows the job. she's been in the job. She knows the job. So that gives her an advantage in making an evaluation. But they're all great. I could make an argument for any one of them and just say, well, I don't understand why it can't be this one. I don't understand why it can't be that one, because they're all great. And I've worked with each of them, so I know pretty well what they bring to the table.
I want to end the way I started, with your extraordinary life and career.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 67. I say I'm on the back nine. My husband says I'm on the 14th hole, which I really don't appreciate. You're a few years older than I am.
More than a few.
And, you know, these days I do think about my own mortality and what I've contributed. I hope I've done something good in the world. And I'm just curious, when you think about your legacy, Speaker Pelosi, what do you think about? What do you hope it will be?
Well, I don't think about it too much, but I think about yours, and I think that young women around the country for a while now have looked to you with enjoyment, pride, confidence that they might be able to do something similar, because you have shared your personal experiences in a very generous, with great generosity of spirit. So thank you for that. That's why I'm here with you today, out of the respect that we all have for you. From my standpoint, I just want women to know their power, to be ready for whatever opportunity comes along, and when it does, to be themselves, because there's no one like them in the world. And I give them the same advice that Lindy gave me. She gave it to me because I said, I have 3 important titles in the Democratic Party. I should probably give one up. She said, darling, no man would ever make that statement. Know your power and use it, which I did, and here I am.
Well, thank you so much, Speaker Pelosi. I wasn't fishing for compliments when I asked you that question.
No, but I wanted to say that because you're wonderful. You know, you're just really a remarkable person, and we all think about legacy and the rest, but it's really important to know how young women, or not even young going into the field, they may come out of the kitchen or the nursery or wherever it is, to be in the public arena.
Well,
and that they've got to see the respect that you command. Maybe they could do that.
Well, that's why I believe representation is so critically important. I've been watching the Olympics, and I've been seeing all these extraordinary female athletes, and now there are as many women as men in these Olympics for the first time. And I think, and then I see little girls on the balance beam in their living rooms, and I think this is why it matters, because it sounds trite, but they say if you can't be it, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I really think that's true. That's why we need people in visible leadership positions coming from the whole spectrum, of America, from rural places, different socioeconomic levels. We need to see everyone, so everyone can see themselves in those people.
Well, you know, one of the things I want to say to you now is that's what Joe Biden was all about. When we did the infrastructure bill, he had a 40% justice piece in there, so that the outreach would be that everyone could participate job-wise, but not only that, equity-wise, could have ownership of some of the opportunities that were there, but also that there would be training for it as well, so that people see a whole different avenue. Same thing with the CHIPS and Science Act. The CHIPS Act was what it was, but the Science Act was STEM. We in California call it STEAM: science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics. But we have the arts in there too. But the STEM in this bill to reach out so that women and people of color and the rest who might not have been drawn into this are, and there's so much talent out there, unexploited, I don't like to use that word, but
untapped.
Untapped, okay. And so that he has that in each of the bills was to make sure, and he would say to me all the time, what are the workers thinking? Is it getting to the workers? What are the workers thinking? Not for a political reason, but for the effectiveness of the legislation. Because it's one thing to pass a bill, have it signed into law. It's a big deal. But the execution of it is really important, and he did both. He helped pass and execute things that are making it really different. It used to be people would have a highway come through their neighborhood and divide it. That's not what this is about. It's about how we unify neighborhoods, and let's listen to people about how they would see it and what are the job opportunities for them. When you make those decisions, you make job opportunities one way or another.
What advice would you give to Kamala Harris to convey that to the American people? And what do you think are going to be the most important issues of this campaign?
Well, I always say the same thing to women. Be yourself. You know, don't go out there and just you're the Vice President of the United States. You have had opportunity beyond description in that role. You know the challenges, you know the possibilities. Everything is an opportunity. So take your priorities out there. Be yourself. I keep coming back to that. Be yourself. And she's a great communicator. She knows what is at stake in a larger sense. I don't want any of us, this is not for her, it's for all of us, to be talking about what are the important issues. I come right back to the kitchen table. When people ask me what are the most important issues, our children, our children, our children. Their health, their education, the economic security of their families, safe neighborhoods in which they can thrive, including safety from gun violence, and a world at peace in which they can thrive and reach their fulfillment. But we come right down to that kitchen table. Some of those issues are democracy issues too. Right to choose, to have a family, right to choose who you love, right to choose the field you might want to be in. That might not sound as, shall we say, prestigious as some might want you to pursue, but it's your choice. And we want you to have that opportunity, whether it's in technology or vocationally, whatever it happens to be. And that's what our country is about. And so when you're addressing innovation or globalization, legitimate concerns that people have, and we have to respect that. And some of them don't understand, well, they understand what it means to them, so it's not to disrespect their understanding of it, but we have to make it clear to them what this means to them.
And they have, the issues they care about have to be addressed.
That's right. Well, they were addressed. So we did that for 2 years. That's why I'm praising Joe Biden so much, and I want his legacy to be protected. A far different agenda than the Project 225, which the president says, I don't even know those people. No, one of them was his Office of Budget and Management and Budget. One was his personnel person. No, they worked right in his office. So again, misrepresentation. But he gets away with it because you tell misrepresentation enough times, people start accepting it as fact. And we don't want to go around being fearmongers saying, look, he lied again. No, we're talking about what we bring to the table. I feel very confident about the election, especially now. The enthusiasm is great, and that's the energy that runs a campaign. So, and Kamala is just, she'll be great. And we're all awaiting who the vice president will be.